Okay, so for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at something pretty important, I would say, if you're involved in any kind of construction project, and that is risk management. And for this session, we're specifically going to be looking at the RICS practice information document. So if you want to know how the experts are thinking about uncertainty, both the good and the bad in the world of building, well, this is a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this RICS document, it really is a fantastic resource for anyone working in this field. It gives you, a clear framework for thinking about, what could potentially affect your project. That's both positive and negative. How to prepare for those things. It's really all about minimizing those potential problems and really capitalizing on any opportunities that come along. And what's really useful about this is it's not some outdated guide. It supersedes an older RICS paper from all the way back in 2000. So it's very much reflecting the latest thinking.
And it's not just from one point of view either. This practice information document, it's actually benefited from the insights of a whole range of experts from across the construction industry. We're talking people from big companies like AECOM, Lang O'Rourke, Leeds, NBS, Capita, Nottingham Trent University, DBK, RICS themselves, Carillion Construction Ltd, McBain's, Cooper Consulting. So, a lot of serious experience has gone into this document.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's a wealth of knowledge distilled in there.
Yeah. So I guess our mission for this deep dive is really to pull out those key principles, the practical steps, and those essential things that we need to consider about risk management in construction. And of course, we're basing all of this on this RICS document. We want to make sure that, if you're listening to this, you come away with a core understanding and do it quickly and effectively.
That's it. Straight to the point.
Straight to the point. Okay, so let's get right to it. Now, the word risk gets thrown around a lot, but what exactly does it mean in this context? I mean, this document actually draws on a few different definitions, which I thought was actually quite helpful.
Yeah, it does. And, if you look at those different definitions, you will see a consistent theme coming through. So I guess essentially you could say that risk is an uncertain event or set of circumstances that, should it occur, can have an impact on your project outcomes.
Yeah.
And I think this is really important to note. RICS really takes quite a broad view of risk. It's not just about those potential negative events, the things that could go wrong, but also about the potential positive events, the opportunities that you could capitalize on.
Right. So it's not just about avoiding headaches. There's a potential upside as well.
Exactly. You've got to be looking at both sides of the coin.
So, digging into those definitions a little bit, NRM1, which is the RICS New Rules of Measurement, they define risk as the chance of something happening or failing and what the consequences of that would be. And then, you have the IEC guide saying it's the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And it says that this uncertainty is a possible future event that combines how likely a threat or opportunity is with how big its consequences would be.
Yeah. And the APM body of knowledge, they add to that risk is an uncertain event that would affect your project's objectives. And then you've got the government guidance, the management of risk guidance, the Orange Book, and they talk about uncertainty of outcome. And they stress that this uncertainty of outcome could be positive or negative, and it's the combination of the likelihood of an event and its consequence. So you can see from all of those that there's a common thread running through these definitions, and that is this idea of uncertainty in the future and the potential impact that could have.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing that this document is really clear about, and this is something I think that's really crucial for anyone working in this field, is the difference between a risk and an issue. People often use these terms interchangeably, but they're not the same thing at all.
No, exactly. Risks are those uncertain future events that we've just been discussing, whereas an issue is an event that is happening now or is almost certain to happen very soon. So, think of it this way. A risk might be a delay in getting, a key material delivered. An issue is, that delivery hasn't arrived and is holding up progress on site.
Right. So issues, they demand immediate action.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got to jump on them straight away.
This document even provides definitions for issue from the government's risk guidance. So it it highlights there that an issue is something that has already happened. It wasn't part of the original plan, and it now needs to be managed. So, things like disagreements, concerns that have materialized, decisions that haven't been made, or even risks that have actually occurred.
Yeah. And I guess, why you might not have been able to predict the exact cost of an issue beforehand, you still need a plan to deal with it, just like you would with a risk. You've got to figure out what to do, who's responsible, and when it needs to be resolved.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good handle now on what risk is and how it's different from an issue, something that's already happening. Now, what kinds of risks, what should you be thinking about on your construction projects? I mean, this document breaks them down into some general categories.
It does, yeah. It outlines five general categories to get you started. So first up, you've got what are known as political and business risks. So these are the big strategic risks that could really impact the client's overall business if the project goes badly wrong. We're talking things like major delays, hitting their share price, or preventing them from operating in a new facility as planned.
And then we've got benefit risks. So these are all about the project not actually delivering what it was supposed to, which kind of undermines the whole reason for doing it in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all very well the project being completed on time and on budget, but if it doesn't achieve those core business objectives, then what was the point?
Yeah. I mean, the document actually gives an example here of planning restrictions, limiting the size of a building and therefore, the potential rental income. So even if the building is constructed perfectly, it doesn't actually deliver the intended benefit.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess, it's difficult for the project team to completely eliminate these types of risk. But what's crucial is that the client, they do their due diligence up front and, perhaps use techniques like sensitivity analysis to really understand what the potential impact on the business case might be. And then you've got the third category, which is consequential risks. So these are all about the ripple effects, where one risk triggers another. So that could be within the project itself, impacting other tasks, or it could even be outside the project, impacting the client's ongoing operations. For example, you could have a power outage on site, which then causes wider disruption to the existing business.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one small thing can kind of have this domino effect.
Exactly. Yeah. You got to be thinking ahead with those. And then you've got category 4, which is, I guess, probably what most people immediately associate with construction. That is the project risks. These are the things that can actually go wrong during the actual building process, directly impacting those classic project constraints of time, cost, and quality.
Right. So time, cost, and quality.
The triangle, the iron triangle of project management.
Exactly. Yeah. And then finally, you've got program risks. So these are risks that affect a whole program of related projects rather than just one individual project. So they're much more about the overarching strategy. So things like funding problems across the program, clashes in organizational culture between different project teams, business continuity concerns at a program level, and importantly, if a risk within a single project becomes so significant that it's threatening the entire program's objectives, then it would be escalated to this level as well. Okay, so that's really helpful, that breakdown of those 5 general categories of risk. Now, the document also mentions the NRM1 risk categories, which are specifically used when you're looking at cost estimating and cost planning. So these seem to be a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more detailed and a little bit more for those who are kind of, really in the financial side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So NRM1, it provides a breakdown into 4 key areas, specifically for, cost management purposes. So first off, you've got design development risks. So these cover all the uncertainties that come up during that design phase. So that could be changes in the design itself, fluctuations in the cost data that's being used to form estimates, risks associated with external parties like, planning authorities, environmental groups, evolving statutory requirements, the procurement route that's been chosen, and potential delays in the tendering process.
And then you've got construction risks. So these are all about what can happen on the ground during the build.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that might be things like limitations on site access, the complexities of working with existing buildings or dealing with current occupants, unexpected ground conditions. That's always a classic, isn't it? Issues with existing utilities and delays caused by the utility companies themselves.
Right. Yeah. It seems like there's always something that that pops up when you're digging in the ground.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to find, do you?
And then the third NRM1 category is employer change risk. So this is essentially a provision for changes that the client might initiate. So whether that's to the scope of work, the quality standards they require, or the overall project timeline. And this can happen at any stage, from initial design right through to the construction phase.
Yeah, and then the final one is employer other risks. So this is kind of a bit of a catch-all, really, for any other potential issues that the client might face.
Yeah.
So that might be things like needing early handover of parts of the project, the decision to postpone or speed up the project, the availability of funding, potential financial penalties or bonuses on other contracts that are linked to the project timeline, unusual tendering procedures that the client might require, or any special conditions within the contract itself.
Okay, and it's really important to understand that the client and the project team often see these risks, from slightly different angles. So, the project team is usually focused on managing those direct risks to the project's, delivery and some of those immediate kind of knock-on effects. But they also need to make sure that the client is fully aware of those broader business and benefit risks, so that they can put their own strategies in place to handle those things, because ultimately those higher level business and benefit risks are the things that the client is most concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's their money, it's their investment, and they're the ones that are ultimately going to be affected, if the project goes wrong.
Okay, so we've identified a lot of different flavors of risk, I guess you could say. So what does the document actually tell us about how you should actually deal with them? And it talks about response and mitigation strategies.
Yeah. And this is really the crucial next step. So the document lays out 5 key strategies for dealing with risk. So first off, there's risk avoidance. So this is where a risk is considered so unacceptable that you take action to completely get rid of it. So, for example, that might include seriously rethinking the entire project brief, coming up with a fundamentally different design approach, or even, decided to cancel the project altogether if the risks are simply too high.
Okay. Yeah. So risk avoidance really means kind of steering clear of that risk altogether.
Exactly. If you can avoid it completely, then that's the best outcome.
And then you have risk reduction. So that's about taking steps to lower either the chance of the risk happening or the impact it would have if it did.
Exactly. Yeah. So that might be things like carrying out more detailed site investigations to get better ground information, choosing alternative materials or suppliers to avoid those long lead times, or selecting different construction methods that are less prone to certain problems.
Right. So really kind of taking steps to minimize the potential impact of that risk.
Exactly. And then the third strategy is risk transfer. So this involves passing responsibility for a particular risk to another party who is better placed to manage it. And I guess a common example in construction is transferring certain risks to the contractor, although you need to be aware that this usually comes at a cost. The contractor will factor in a price for taking on that risk. So, for it to be a worthwhile strategy, the total potential cost of that risk should be reduced by more than the extra that you pay to transfer it. Insurance is another key way to transfer certain types of risk.
Okay. And then next up, you've got risk sharing. So this is where the risk isn't fully passed on, but the employer, they retain some part of it.
Yeah. So risks are shared between the client and the contractor. They're often handled using provisional quantities. So the contractor, they take on the risk of the price, but the employer, they handle the risk of the actual quantity needed.
Right. So kind of splitting that risk between those two parties.
Exactly. Yeah. You're spreading the burden. And then finally, you've got risk retention. So this is where the employer decides to accept certain risks, particularly those that are difficult or costly to transfer or mitigate effectively. This remaining risk is often called the residual risk exposure. And it's really important to remember that as your project moves forward and you get more information, that level of risk exposure will change. So ongoing management is absolutely key here.
And this document also makes a really important point. I think, risk allowances shouldn't just be kind of a standard percentage tacked onto the cost.
No, not at all.
It really emphasizes that these allowances should be based on a careful assessment and quantification of the specific risks that you've identified.
Absolutely. You've got to do your homework and really understand those risks.
Yeah. And then once you've put these response strategies in place, I mean, your work isn't done. Ongoing risk monitoring and control are absolutely vital.
Absolutely. Yeah. Risks are always evolving. The situation is always changing.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to be constantly vigilant. It's not a one-off exercise. It's a continuous process.
So, I mean, this document actually recommends that you regularly review your risk profile, and you should be looking for, any changes in how likely those risks are, how big the impact could be, and ideally, you should be doing this on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and those steps that you're taking to deal with those risks, they should also be checked monthly. Any necessary adjustment should be made along the way, and then the risk register itself, that should be updated quarterly to reflect any new risks that have emerged, changes in project scope, progress that's been made, and any evolving factors that could affect risk. And it even suggests that you should have a quarterly review of how mature your overall risk management processes are. So again, it's about that continuous improvement, constantly refining your approach.
Right. So it's not a case of just, doing this once at the start of the project and then kind of forgetting about it. It really needs to be an ongoing process.
Exactly. And then what's also really interesting to think about is how risks can be interconnected. These consequential risks where one event can trigger or make another one worse. It can really complicate things.
Yeah.
You can have a problem that seems quite small initially, and then that can quickly escalate. So, really understanding these connections, how different risks relate to each other, that's a really crucial part of risk management. And the risk manager, they play a vital role in communicating and coordinating across different parts of the project to manage these linked risks.
Right. Yeah. It's all about communication and making sure that everyone is aware of those potential knock-on effects.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also really important to be careful that you're not counting the same risk twice in your register. That can sometimes happen, if different people are looking at things from slightly different angles.
Yeah.
So, the document suggests that you can avoid this by, clearly classifying risks as, strategically versus operationally. And, having regular reviews led by someone with a good overview of the project, that can help you avoid this as well.
Okay. So we've talked about the importance of identifying risks. Now, how does the procurement process tie into this? I mean, the document highlights that the procurement process should start with the client developing a strategy, and that strategy takes into account the risks, the potential benefits, the budget, the time constraints, and the quality requirements, and that helps them to really decide on the most suitable procurement route and the right contractual arrangements.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to finding the most effective way to deliver the project whilst keeping those key objectives in mind. Those objectives, they're all centered around cost, time, and quality risk. And it's about, thinking about those right from the start. And the emphasis that you place on any one of those criteria, it will definitely have a knock-on effect on the others. So, for example, if you push for a very high level of quality, that might well impact both the cost and the time that it takes to complete the project.
Right. So there's always, some kind of trade-off between those three things.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's about understanding what your priorities are as a client. So how much you're willing to spend. The level of quality that you absolutely need and the date by which you absolutely need that project to be finished. So understanding those priorities is absolutely fundamental to selecting the right way to procure a project. And then that choice will then determine how you select the teams involved in the initial stages, the design and the construction and also the level of responsibility that they hold.
Okay. And there are so many different ways to procure a construction project. This document really stresses how important it is to really evaluate each option thoroughly and to really understand its characteristics, its advantages, disadvantages, and crucially the risks that come with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta weigh up those pros and cons very carefully, because different procurement routes, they inherently have different risk profiles, and that's why the document recommends preparing a risk register right at the beginning. Specifically looking at all the potential risks associated with the procurement route that you're considering, and that should include how likely each risk is to occur, and what the potential impact would be if it did. And based on that, you can then figure out the right steps to mitigate those risks and the best management practices to put in place.
Okay, and then the document also touches on a whole range of what it calls procurement factors that will influence your strategy, and it's quite a list. It includes things like the type of client you are, how the risks are going to be shared, the amount of time that you have available, how important it is to have a fixed cost, the stage that the design has reached, who's going to be responsible for the design, whether you need any specialist input if you're using BIM, how complex the project is, how you'll handle changes as they come up, and even how the contract will be administered.
Yeah, and as the document points out, these factors, they're often interconnected, and they can even pull in different directions.
Yeah.
So choosing the right procurement strategy, it's often about finding the best possible balance across all these different considerations.
Right. So it's all about kind of weighing up those different factors and finding that sweet spot where you're balancing those different considerations. Now, let's move on to something that can feel a bit intimidating. That is risk quantification. So the document outlines various techniques for actually putting numbers to those risks that you've identified. So we're talking numbers in terms of cost and time.
Yeah, and risk quantification can be incredibly valuable in certain situations. So it can help you build a robust risk allowance as part of your overall project budget. It's often required for reporting purposes within your organization or to external stakeholders, especially if your project is part of a larger program. It can even help to motivate your teams to take ownership of those actions that are needed to manage the risks. And sometimes it's a strict requirement from clients or the organizations that are providing funding.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of these techniques that you might come across. So the first one that's mentioned is probability trees.
Yeah, so probability trees are really useful when risks are linked, where whether one risk happens, it might depend on how you've dealt with another one. And the document actually gives a nice clear example here. It's about ordering equipment where there's a potential issue with your first choice supplier, and then a secondary potential issue with an alternative supplier.
Mm-hmm.
But that only becomes relevant if the first problem actually occurs.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps you to visually map out that sequence of events and the overall likelihood of different outcomes.
Right. So it helps you to kind of visualize those different possibilities.
Exactly. And then you got the central limit theorem, which sounds a bit mathematical.
It does, yeah.
It is. It's a statistical technique, but essentially it can be used to give you a 90% confidence level for your project's contingency fund, and it does that by looking at the estimated costs and the probabilities of each individual risk. But we'll touch on the specific formula a bit later when we talk about how to provide the data for this kind of calculation.
Okay. And then we've got Monte Carlo simulation. I've heard that mentioned quite a lot in project management discussions.
Yeah. Monte Carlo is a really powerful technique. It uses computer-generated simulations to model a wide range of possible outcomes for your project. So you input the probability distributions and the potential impacts of the various risks, and the software runs thousands of simulations to give you a probabilistic view of things like how likely you are to finish the project within a certain budget or time frame. So they can be really insightful when dealing with complex projects.
Right, and it kind of helps you to see those different possibilities, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a way of exploring those what ifs.
Okay. And then the document also mentions fault tree analysis and event tree analysis. And it sounds like these two kind of approach things from opposite directions.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. So fault tree analysis, it takes a deductive approach.
Yeah.
So you start with, a specific negative outcome that you want to avoid, and then you work backwards to identify all the potential causes and contributing factors that could lead to it. Whereas event tree analysis, that's inductive. So you start with an initial event, and then you explore all the possible subsequent outcomes that could arise from it. So it helps you understand that potential chain of events.
Right. So it's kind of like, with fault tree analysis, you're starting with the end in mind.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're working backwards from that undesirable outcome.
Right. And then with event tree analysis, you're kind of starting at the beginning and seeing where that might lead.
Exactly. Yeah. You're following the path forward.
Okay, so we've got those two, and then we get into some perhaps simpler methods that you might use. So there's percentage addition.
Yeah, 'cause percentage addition, that's a very basic, initial way of estimating a risk allowance. And you do that by simply applying a percentage to different parts of your cost plan based on how risky you perceive each part to be. So, for example, you might add a higher percentage to the construction costs than to the the fees for the design team. But it really is only suitable for very early high level estimates.
Right. So that's kind of your first rough estimate.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very broad brush approach.
And then there's the simple method of assessment.
Yeah. So this is a bit more refined. You assign a likely cost and a probability of occurrence to each identified risk in your register. And then you multiply the cost by the probability to get an expected value for each risk. And the sum of all those expected values, well, that gives you an overall risk allowance.
Okay. And then there's a more, I guess, in-depth version of that, which is the probabilistic method. It's also known as three-point estimating.
Yeah. So with this method, instead of just one likely cost for each risk, you estimate a best-case scenario, a most likely scenario, and a worst-case scenario. And you also assign a probability to each of those. And that gives you, a more nuanced expected value for each risk. And as a result, a more informed overall risk allowance.
Right. So you're kind of looking at that range of possibilities.
Exactly. And then finally, you got sensitivity analysis, sometimes known as what-if analysis.
Right.
And sensitivity analysis is a really practical way of understanding which risks or project factors have the biggest potential impact on the final outcome. So you essentially change the values of key factors one at a time, and you see how the overall project cost or schedule, how that changes. So it doesn't give you a definitive mathematical answer, but it really highlights those critical areas that you need to pay the most attention to.
Right. So it's about kind of understanding those key drivers of risk.
Exactly. Yeah, those factors that can really make a big difference.
Okay. And finally, on the topic of quantification, the document touches on how risk affects your project program and cost. And it specifically mentions schedule quantitative risk analysis.
Yeah. So schedule quantitative risk analysis takes your project schedule, which is often built using the critical path method, and it layers in the risks that you've identified and their potential impact on how long each task might take. And by running simulations similar to the Monte Carlo method, it can give you a confidence level around your project completion dates. So it gives you a more realistic forecast, and it helps you to identify areas where you might need to take action to keep things on track.
Right. So it's about taking that schedule and kind of factoring in those uncertainties.
Exactly. Because in the real world, things don't always go, exactly according to plan.
Right.